take a moment and read the Atlantic Charter from 1941 and ask yourself the question, what were the Allied goals for after World War II and that were outlined in the Atlantic Charter? And do you think that these goals were achieved? So excerpts that I've pulled out from the Atlantic Charter say, their countries seek no aggressiveness, territorial or other. And remember that their countries are talking about the United States and Great Britain or the United Kingdom. That they respect the right of all people to choose their form of government, so to be able to have self-determination. They desire securing for all improved labor, economic advancement. They believe all nations of the world, for realistic as well as spiritual reasons, must come to the abandonment of the use of force, since no future peace can be maintained if land, sea, or air armaments continue to be employed by nations which threaten or may threaten aggression. So, do you think that these goals, to seek no territorial aggressiveness, to respect other nations, and improve economic accessibility and labor for everybody, do you think that these things have been achieved? I think undoubtedly these things have improved around the world, and that in general the use of force and the lack of world wars and blatant imperial expansion has decreased. However, our standards for these things have also increased. And so there are many people that criticize the United States and Great Britain and say that we haven't done this yet. So I want to talk about President Clinton's presidency and think about the things that he did as foreign interventions, and do they comply with the way that FDR envisioned the world after the World War? Are we following through with those ideas? So Clinton's presidency was interesting. It faced a divided government. Both houses were Republican while he was a Democrat. And this is true in his first term. This isn't true during his first term, but during his second term, he faces an entirely Republican Congress. And this is a really difficult thing to deal with as a president. It makes it difficult to pass your policies and get things through that you want. But President Clinton, despite this, was a very, very popular president, even through the Monica Lewinsky scandal. The Monica Lewinsky scandal was a scandal in which he was accused and found guilty of having a sexual relationship with a woman that worked for him in the White House, Monica Lewinsky. And he lied to the American public about his involvement in that scandal. And so it led to a lot of distrust between him and Congress. And the Republican Congress also used this as an opportunity to try to kick him out. He did, after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, an impeachment trial was put into place, and he actually had to give the State of the Union address to Congress during that time. And so while Congress is deciding whether or not they're going to impeach him, he's coming to them saying, here's the State of the Union. And the State of the Union was actually very good at the time. The economy was booming and other things, and the impeachment trial didn't go through. The Senate began but did not acquit him on the articles of impeachment. But the media at the time really slammed him. They called him a liar, which he was, because he wasn't honest about his relationship. The economy at the time was booming. He made compromises. Liberals say too many compromises to get things done in D.C. Many liberals accuse him of sort of abandoning his Democratic base in order to be more moderate and accommodate the Republican Congress. In many ways, President Clinton sounds kind of Republican, especially economically. Here's an example. Don't write this down, but he gives a radio address in 1996, and he says, "These are the 7 challenges that I set forth Tuesday night to strengthen our families." And I bolded that because strengthening our families, that's talking about family values. To renew our schools and expand educational opportunity. That's kind of a neutral issue. Both Democrats and Republicans feel very strongly about education. To help every American who is willing to work. Now, a liberal would have ended it with to help every American. And he adds this piece, who is willing to work. And this is very much a conservative value, to not give government handouts willy-nilly, but to give out government handouts to people that are trying and working hard. And so limiting government handouts, and maybe handouts is a biased Republican word to use, but to give Social Securities, Medicare, and Medicaid to people that really truly need it and are working really hard to get it and still can't. To achieve economic security, to take our streets back from crime. Republicans like to be hard on crime, and that's something that liberals tend to not be in favor of. But here, Clinton, even though he's a Democrat, is addressing the issue of crime. There was a situation in Waco, Texas, which is an example of him being hard on crime. He also increases incarceration rates by passing certain legislations that makes it easier to put people in jail. To protect our environment. Okay, here he is getting back to being a little bit more democratic. To reinvent our government so that it serves better. Okay, that's a little Democrat, but he adds costs less. And to keep America out of the leading leading force for peace and freedom throughout the world. He says we will meet these challenges not through big government. He says the era of big government is over. And that's a very interesting thing. Big government is a phrase that Republicans like to use to talk about, expanding government and control of government and them manipulating and blah, blah, blah. But having a big government that regulates things and redistributes wealth is a very progressive liberal idea. And so he is saying the era of big government is over, which sounds very Republican. But we can't go back to a time when our citizens were just left to fend for themselves. Okay, so he's sort of compromising. He's choosing a middle ground here. He says, as we move forward with tomorrow's challenges, we also must take care of yesterday's unfinished business. First, we must balance the budget. Very Republican sounding. In the 12 years before I took office, the deficit skyrocketed and our national debt quadrupled. I came to Washington determined to act, and we did. So you can see his confliction here, but also and how conflicted he is here. But you can also sense that he is really trying to appeal to the other people across the aisle in these addresses. He does do some things that many liberals applaud. He appoints many women, including his wife, to important political positions. He appointed his wife, Hillary Clinton, to run the task force to reform health care. His wife, Hillary Clinton, was actually a pretty active politician before he took office. He had been the governor of Arkansas, and while he was governor of Arkansas, Hillary Clinton was the highest paid attorney in that state, and so she has been active, and some people argue she's sort of the brains behind their operation. He sets a goal to ensure, and Hillary's goal is to ensure universal coverage and to control the skyrocketing costs of healthcare. And that was something that they addressed and said they would address in 1993. Hillary Clinton's plan did make some changes, but it did not achieve universal coverage. That goal of universal coverage was something that Obama's Affordable Care Act, the ACA, or also known as Obamacare, tries to readdress because it doesn't work in the 1990s. He appointed a woman named Janet Reno to the Attorney General. She's the first woman to ever serve in that position. He also appoints Democrat Ruth Ginsburg to the Supreme Court, and she's the second woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court and replaces the woman that was retiring then. Clinton also faces some major challenges in Iraq. Under George H.W. Bush's, George H.W. Bush goes to Baghdad to sort of visit there, to give some talks and sort of see the state of Iraq at the time. And his life was threatened while he was there. And so President Clinton, in response to this, threatened attack against a former U.S. president, sends in the Navy to attack Iraqi military targets. And this is kind of an aggressive action, but also showing our consistent concern with what's going on in Iraq under Saddam Hussein's regime. Again, in 1994, Clinton threatens to send troops to Kuwait to deter another Iraqi invasion of Kuwait after the Gulf War. So Iraq is continually threatening the region and possible expansion, and you can see throughout Clinton's presidency that we are very worried about what is going on in Iraq. Clinton also plays a major role in negotiating between Israel and Palestine, or the Palestinians, even though the United States does not technically recognize Palestine as a country. Clinton presides over a ceremony for the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian sort of leader. Together in this meeting, they signed the Israeli-Palestinian Declaration of Principles in 1993. And this is the first agreement between the Jews and the Palestinians, the Arab-Muslim Palestinians, where they sort of try to establish principles of peace between the two. There's a long history of terrorism and violence between Israel and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights, and so he is trying to help these two negotiate some sort of principles of peace. This also provides for Palestinian self-government in the Gaza Strip and West Bank and limits the control of the Jewish Israeli government. He later negotiated a plan for withdrawal of Israeli troops from the West Bank. So Israel had been occupying these territories that Palestinians lived in, and so he negotiates for the withdrawal of Israeli troops under the premise that there would be peace and security in the region, which hasn't quite happened. Israel still has a number of checkpoints, and travel between the West Bank, Gaza Strip into Israel is still heavily restricted. And on the daily, there are terrorist attacks, which is what the Israelis call them, between unhappy Palestinians and the Israeli people. President Clinton also does something pretty major, which is he settles a major conflict going on in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is a territory that was created after World War I out of the former Austria-Hungary Empire, and it combined a number of different smaller areas of that region, the Balkan region of Europe, and brings together a bunch of different ethnic groups that don't necessarily agree or like each other. It also brings together a bunch of different religions, and they all have a lot of different ties and are very different people and cultures. The Dayton Agreement was an agreement that settled a war that was happening between the Serbians and the Bosnians. These accords put an end to the Bosnian War, which is probably more accurately described as a genocide, which was part of the wars in Yugoslavia, which led to the breaking up of the Yugoslavian country and created Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, and all these smaller little countries just to the northeast of Italy. Serbia had invaded Bosnia, and in the process, thousands were massacred and raped, and there are many, many accounts of families fleeing, people so desperate to get out of this area, Bosnians so desperate to get out of the Serbian attacks, that they grab pillows instead of their babies and just flee through the night running. Many women were raped during this time to spread the Serbian seed and try to kill off the Bosnians. This was a defining moment for the Clinton presidency. The UN had been trying to no avail to create peace there. There were UN peacekeeping forces there, and they were not armed and weren't able to really do anything, and the Serbian aggression was pretty blatant. and something aggressive needed to be done. And so President Clinton does send in American forces to stop this genocide that's happening there. And pretty much unilaterally, meaning on his own, brings an end to this situation. So this was a pretty defining moment for the Clinton presidency. He risked a lot. He didn't have a lot of support for this in the United States, but ultimately it worked and really made him look very good. Interestingly, I wanted to just point something out to you. Yugoslavian people are typically white, although not everybody is white. And one of the things that we promised ourselves after World War II was that we would end genocides of all sorts. And so in front of you is a list of genocides that have happened since World War II. And if you go through and look at this list, you will notice that most of the countries that are on the list here are either located in Africa, South America, or Asia. And the situation in Bosnia is interesting because it's a European country that is struggling with genocide, and this is one of the only ones on the list that we get involved in. And not to be too critical of something really great that the United States did, but a lot of people feel strongly that while this is really good, we could have stepped in many other situations, and we didn't. One of the most cited ones is 1962 in Rwanda and 1994 in Rwanda. The United States could have done something and did not do anything. This picture appeared on in Time magazine, showing evidence of the genocide in Yugoslavia. But I've put this here just to highlight that maybe the difference here is that the Yugoslavians and the Bosnians look more similar to Americans or to Europeans, and are European, and so perhaps this is why we got involved in this one and maybe not the other ones. But at the same time, a defining moment for the Clinton presidency and really makes him look good when it comes to foreign interventions. There was a major problem during his time. There's a movie based off of this. It's called Black Hawk Down. There was a battle of Mogadishu. There was an intervention in Somalia that went terribly, and 18 American soldiers died. The goal of this mission was to capture aids to a warlord named Muhammad Fahara Aidid, I think. Involvement there had started under Bush Sr. We were coming in to try to help out the Somalian people during a civil war. And during that time, we had hoped that our involvement would be purely humanitarian, but this warlord was suspected of killing some of the peacekeeping forces from the United Nations and from the United States, and so we went in to try to take out him and his aides, and it went terribly. And you can see American Black Hawks, which is the name for our helicopters, went down, and it didn't go very well, and ultimately we ended up pulling our troops out of Somalia and ended our involvement there. And Somalia is still struggling today with warlords and other issues there. And then another piece here, both Bush Sr. and Clinton had opportunities to deal with and possibly take out bin Laden, and they don't. Terrorists bombed American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania and killed 224 people, including 20 Americans. U.S. intelligence believed that bin Laden, who was at the time a Saudi Arabian exile, an alleged terrorist leader, was behind the attacks, but we didn't go after him then. And this really sets us up for talking about, this is sort of where we leave it. This is 1998, I believe, and this is 3 years prior to September 11th and bin Laden's involvement there. And so this sets us up for understanding some of the background to those attacks and opportunities that we had had to stop it before then. Also, our awareness of his threat to our country. It also sets us up to understand that these attacks were not isolated and that attacks on Americans have been happening for a long time, and that frustrations with America are developing, and we can sort of look at that from multiple perspectives and understand that there are people in the world that are really unhappy with American intervention abroad.